Thank you so much for joining us for NAMI Maryland's 39th Annual Conference. My name is Monique Owens, and I am a volunteer with NAMI Maryland. I will be your moderator for this session today. This workshop session is De-Escalation. Should I intervene, and how can I help? Presented by Stephen Thomas and Arundel County Police. You can read more about our amazing presenter, including his full bio, in the digital conference program on the official conference website. This workshop will discuss why someone should intervene to de-escalate someone in crisis, as well as what is the purpose of the de-escalation. Further, this session will discuss the communication skills necessary to develop a relationship with a person in crisis to guide them to their pre-crisis status. If this is not the workshop you meant to attend, please click the back button on your browser or click on the conference drop-down on the left-hand side of your screen and select sessions from the menu to return to the full list of workshops we have available. We will be addressing questions at the end of this presentation. If you have any questions as the presentation continues, please post them on the social wall on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be receiving questions as they come in, and if something in particular is unclear or needs to be expanded, we will ask our presenter after their presentation is completed. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please post them to your social wall, and our technical assistant will address them accordingly. When posting to the social wall, please be aware that there's a 20 to 30 second delay between the presentation and the stream on Conference Tracker. When this workshop session closes, you will be prompted to fill out a brief survey. If you would like to receive CEUs for this workshop, you must complete this survey in order to qualify. I'd now like to welcome our presenter for today, Stephen Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Monique, thank you. So first I want to start off with give a little background when myself and how I came upon really understanding de-escalation. So I'm a lieutenant with the Arundel County Police. However, when you look at the unification or the integration of mental health and law enforcement, in Anne Arundel County, we do it a little different. Instead of bringing mental health and clinicians into the police department, we've actually taken police department and integrated it into the crisis system. So it's myself, a sergeant, and 8 officers work at Anne Arundel County Crisis Response. And it's multifaceted. We have a warm line. We have mobile crisis teams that are responding to live calls for service from patrol. They're on police radio, police call signs. We have what's called hospital diversion, where we follow up on emergency petitions that are written by police officers. We have what's called our care coordinators that assist not in follow-up, which is really a key, and they're sort of forgotten about. They coordinate the care for individuals with behavioral health crisis. It could either be mental health, it could be substance abuse. They follow up from calls from our mobile clinicians. They follow up from our Safe Station program. And then we have our CIT unit, which is truly where we always go out partnered officer and clinician. Most of what we do is follow up. We do go out to some extreme cases, and that's where I really learned a lot about de-escalation was in working and responding to people in crisis. It could be after traumatic incidents. It could be someone in a mental health, having a mental health challenge that needs help. So as I'm trying to advance, and Monique, I just ran into, it's not letting me do this. Let me reshare my screen. There it goes. So we start off with, actually, we have to ask the question, why am I intervening? Is an intervention necessary? So you start, and sometimes this can be really difficult, not knowing what a person's pre-crisis level is. So we have to look at it. Is it necessary for someone to do an intervention? Is the person in crisis? And now this can be really difficult to tell at times, especially when you start talking about people who have a mental health challenge. Also, is this something that they may seem like that they need to be de-escalated, but are they just venting or blowing off steam, which could be healthy for them? So as I go through, I'm going to try to give a lot of practical examples from my experience as a police officer in our crisis intervention team working in crisis response of this really humanize what I'm talking about. So when someone is ventilating, they're talking about, they're getting their feelings out, a lot of times it can be healthy for that person, but unhealthy, I shouldn't say unhealthy, uncomfortable for the rest of us to see that. And when I say that, I give the example I'm going to give is and I have to be vague because of people's privacy, but I was at a memorial service for a community leader. And some of the family members had suffered with addiction issues. And there was a young man in recovery that was there who was extremely upset because another family member who still was facing their own addiction was nodding out during a memorial service. This young man in recovery was really, really upset, left the room where the memorial service was taking place. It was actually at a hotel in a ballroom. He walked out away from really most of the people there. A handful of people saw him, and he was really, really upset and ventilating. So I'll talk about later about how do we help someone that encourage them to ventilate. But as he's ventilating, it was healthy. And there was another police officer there that I said, people were worried about him. He's in a good spot right now because he's getting his feelings out. So for what we all look at and we're uncomfortable seeing him that way, it was actually good that he's that way. So this can be really difficult. So recognizing that point is someone in crisis or are not they in crisis? And is their behavior actually healthy for them, even though it may be uncomfortable for us? So then we look into it. What is my role? Who am I? Do I have authority to even be involved in this? So as a parent of young adult children and the son of a mother who's 84 and my father died last June, I will always be my mother's child. So she always will have the authority to intervene for me. And as parents, we always have that. We're there, we care about our children, our friends. What is that responsibility of a friend? What authority do we have? A neighbor, a community member, a concerned citizen. But then start thinking about what is my role professionally? Police officers, teachers, we have a different role of other people when we're doing an intervention. Because we're looking at it, think of as a police officer, I'm looking at it as a safety issue, but also how do I help this person? Is there a possibility I can link them to other services? Or do I have to take the extreme and it may be that I have to complete an emergency petition for the person? But it's going to vary what our role is. And I know the conference is varying from people in law enforcement, mental health, as well as people with lived experience and their family members. But what we do, it depends on what role we have, and it changes our authority and how we can help. The key is we always want to be helpful and not hurtful. So, exit and exigency. Do we need to help right now? I'm thinking of one. Is that person's crisis a danger to themselves or others? This can be really frustrating for all of us. And why I say that is, there are people who may be in crisis who are not a danger to themselves or others, because they're not in danger themselves or others or in imminent danger, our options can be limited if they refuse help or they're, and the way I say it, sometimes people can be too sick to understand that they need help. And that can be extremely frustrating for us. So with that, is it an exigency? And we have to be patient. What is the hurry? So I'll give an example. About a month ago, one of our clinicians had already written the EP for a lady who was 84 years old. This lady, her family was with her. She was living in her daughter's house. The problem is she was really sick with her dementia. She had attempted to start a fire in their kitchen. So she had to be emergency petitioned. However, her full mind, her thoughts were not clear. She didn't understand, and she thought that her family was trying to hurt her by taking away things from her, which was keeping her safe. What we did first is we called the fire department, because we had been told, and we thought she was going to be hostile towards us, and the fact that she would actually, not that we were afraid to get hurt, but she was going to be aggressive with us. So you start thinking, how can we help someone like that? And not just her, the entire family. You go into the lawful but awful. We have the legal authority to go in the house, serve the emergency petition, basically, and this is the awful part. Legally, I could go into the house, take the 84-year-old lady, put her in handcuffs, carry her out, throw her in my patrol car, seatbelt her in, or throw her in a cage car, and then drive her to the hospital and emergency petition. That's the legal authority that I have. But that's pretty awful. I would not want anyone treated that way, especially, I try to look at it, I want community members to be treated the same way I want my family to be treated. So what we did is we had an ambulance stand by, thinking that if we had to, we could at least get her in a gurney where she'd be somewhat comfortable. If she was violent and kicking and hitting and things like that, we could leave the least restraint possible. That way, secure her to the gurney, have the ambulance take her to the hospital with an officer in it. The key was we never even had to do that, because we went in, we took our time, and we talked to her, we listened to her, we built a relationship. It took about an hour and a half. And I still, to this day, think back, and I never saw, sometimes you can actually see when people, the click happens and they change, where she cooperated with us. We walked her out to the police car, and she walked on her own. We didn't use any restraints, no handcuffs. She sat in the front seat of the police car, and the officer was able to drive her to the hospital where she was committed on an emergency petition. With that, when the same clinician that did that actually a little bit ago came in and told me that she's actually in long-term care now from that, and how pleased the family is, not just the night that it happened, but that long-term. So we also look at that lawful versus necessary. Can it be that we're doing something in the police or whatever position that it's lawful for us to do it, but it's unnecessary and can make a situation worse? And we start to look at that sometimes with emergency petitions. There may be a time where we're looking for further care, but if we can keep that person safe without petitioning them, isn't that a better alternative? Because think of the trauma that can happen in an emergency petition. And actually, I'll give the example, especially if someone's been petitioned before and has been involved in a criminal justice system. Both instances, someone is arrested, someone is emergency petitioned. There are times people are handcuffed during emergency petition. And actually, we're blessed in Arundel County. Our rules and regs say that we're to use the least force, least restraint possible for someone when they're petitioned. So we do not have to. There are police departments that say that when they're emergency petition someone, they must be handcuffed for that person's safety and the officer's safety. So now you have someone handcuffed. They go to a hospital or they go to jail. In the hospital, they're still put in a room and they've lost their rights. They can't just get up and walk out. No different than going to a central booking or a police station where they're put in a cell. The jail, they go see a commissioner. The emergency petition, they meet with doctors who determine their fate. Do they go home or do they go to the next level of care? If they go to the next level of care, they're taken to an inpatient facility where, again, they can't walk out the door, and eventually they'll have an administrative hearing before the administrative law judge. In the criminal justice system, they go to bail review where the judge decides. So if you look at the practicality of both systems, we're following the law, but aren't they both really similar and traumatizing to people, especially if they've had trauma in the past or have mental health concerns? We don't want to do things that are going to be more harmful. And it's one of the things I love saying is we want to be helpful, not hurtful to someone. So when we're there to help somebody, how do I approach? So what do we mean by that? Is everything. We don't want them to feel uncomfortable. So if someone, and this is a general, it's for police, but not just police, it's for community members. Is there enough space between the person and myself if the person does become aggressive? Is there a place for me to retreat if I need to retreat for my safety? And a lot of times you'll see in law enforcement situations where officers are put in a position where they're not backing down. And we teach officers here in Anne Arundel County, it's okay to take some steps backwards. It's okay to retreat and regroup if necessary, because the safety of everyone is our goal. So am I in a position that I can do that? I also don't want to force someone into a corner. I don't want to force them into a position where they're going to become more defensive, which could lead to them escalating and becoming more aggressive. It's really important that we understand that. We start looking at the principle of ICEN, isolate. We want to isolate the person so they're not in the middle of the community, but we're not going to force them into a corner. And what do we mean by that? Well, isolate, contain. We're going to get other people around, away from them if possible. And then when we say negotiate, as we talk to them, it's building a rapport with them, building a relationship, having empathy with them. What is my purpose? What is my why? And that's so important that people know and understand that you're there to be helpful for them and you're sincere. When you're not sincere, people see right through you. It's across the board in every intervention you do. And then look at it. What am I trying to achieve with the intervention? Is it something that I'm trying to keep the person or the community safe? Am I trying to get them additional linkage to services? Or am I there just to allow a person to ventilate? So an example of that would be when I was at that memorial service and that young man just needed to ventilate. Yeah, he was escalated, but all he needed is to get out, to get his feelings out of his body by talking about them. And that was healthy for him. So let me go back to, am I keeping the person in the community safe? And that's where we have to look at it and say, is this person a danger to themselves or the community? Is it something that I'm worried about that they could attempt to take their life? They could attempt to hurt themselves. And we have to recognize self-harm and a suicide attempt are two different things. Or are they a danger to the community? Is it something I'm keeping them safe or I'm keeping the community safe? Am I just linking them follow-up services? And again, this is when it can be really, really frustrating. I had the same young lady, 2 different calls with her. Great family supports. Her mother actually was who reached out both times. Her mother, a little bit older. And the problem was this: the young lady was not a danger to herself physically. However, she's extremely high educated. She lived in, I couldn't say a high profile family. She also had a high profile job. She was in a state of psychosis. With that psychosis, she was communicating where, with some of the things that she was doing, she could have lost her job. So the key is, and the frustration we had is, okay, we know she needs additional help. How can we provide those services when she's refusing service? Because we got to remember, it's okay. It's not illegal to have mental health challenge. It's not illegal to be in crisis. The key is when it limits our options if they're not a danger to themselves or others. And I hope I make sense with this, because in that case, to link her to follow-up services, she was refusing assistance. She did one thing that allowed me to complete the emergency petition, where I was able to articulate why she was a danger to family members. In our CIT training in Anne Arundel County, we have a teacher that actually teaches for us. She's someone with lived experience. Her diagnosis is bipolar. And she talks about how our patrolmen were so helpful to her in her time of crisis when she was emergency petitioned. But we actually, the key is for her, we have an agreement with her if that she is ever in a time of crisis of what we can do to help her. And in that agreement, it's an advanced directive of, and it's on the state behavioral health website, you can complete that, of things that she's asked us to do, who her emergency contact is. If she's displaying certain behaviors, that means she's most likely in crisis, and what our follow-up plan is with that. Information versus intelligence. This can be really difficult. It's understanding the difference is really important. It's when we're getting third-hand information. Information is what we're told. Intelligence is what we can verify. Can we verify information we're being told from a third party if someone's in crisis? What happens when we can't verify that information? A lot of times we're also looking at it is, what role does that person providing the information have? There are times, and I've seen it, where people attempt to use the emergency petition process as a punishment. Just think about what I said earlier about, is there much of a practical difference between the criminal justice system and being emergency petitioned? When people were saying, I'll have you emergency petitioned, to use it as a punishment. So does that person have a personal bias in the information that they're providing? And how do we verify the information they're telling us? It's really important to understand that with our interventions. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of our communication skills when we're there. Active listening is so important. It's really different, because what we do with this, with our crisis intervention team, with the training we do for officers, it's changing the mindset. Back in 1992, when I went through the police academy and I started as an officer, I started with the Anne Arundel County Police in 1996. We were in and out, go to a call, in and out the door in 5 minutes, solving all the world's problems. In 5 minutes, we're solving everything. Family disputes, domestics, everything, in and out as fast as you can, get to the next call. It's learning to take our time, listening to people, and keep the conversation going with them. Well, how do we do that? When we're listening, it's there, and that's exactly what it is. It's keeping our own mouth shut and giving them the opportunity to talk so that we can hear their story. We do that, and there's times we're going to have to ask questions, but we can ask closed-ended questions to get some basic information. but then follow them up with open-ended questions where we're getting additional information about the who, what, when, how, why, to learn more about them and what they've experienced. Important facet to understand is not to ask someone what's wrong with them, but ask them what they've experienced. And I say that across the board because we don't want to be judgmental. It's a hard, and we're going to talk about that. We have to let them talk without interruption. We have to ask those clarifying questions. So if we're not completely understanding what they're saying, we have to ask them more, to get that nitty gritty to understand what they're experiencing now and what their life experience has been. The further to go into and then paraphrase what they're saying. Let them know that we're listening and we understand what's being said. Because when we paraphrase, if we're wrong, it gives them an opportunity to correct us. I've never had anyone get upset when I've done that, asked a clarifying question, paraphrased, and it can just be as simple as what I hear you saying is this. It lets them be heard. It gives them the opportunity to ventilate. So how do we recognize their emotion? It's both listening to what they're saying, but also reading their nonverbal body language. It lets them know we're listening, and it gives us an opportunity to label the experience that they've had. And it's simple. We can just say something, you seem really angry, you seem really frustrated. And again, when we do that, if we're wrong, that's okay, because they'll correct us, but they know we care, and it's building that empathy. It's building that rapport, and it creates a point of agreement with the person. So when you say, I hear that you're really frustrated or really angry, a lot of times they'll repeat, you listening to me, you're damn right on that way. It encourages them to talk about their feelings. It encourages them to talk about what they are experiencing. And it diffuses their anger. They become more cooperative as we're working with them. This can be really tough as we look in the mirror at ourselves. We have to recognize our own personal biases. We make assumptions based on our own life experiences, as well as our personal values. Think about things that we've experienced will have a definite impact on our interactions. It's really important that we understand that. Understand our own values of what we've experienced in our own lives, how that has how that has an effect on that relationship. We don't want to be judgmental, but we have to understand that. My own past experience can have an implicit bias on that interaction. And I tell you, in Anne Arundel County, officers go through implicit bias training to understand the biases that we have against others. Just it's there, and if any, it can lead. So our personal values can become emotional, which we don't want to do. And it can create conflict with someone that we're trying to help. So we have to recognize them for what they are. So our nonverbal communication skills. Think of 70 to 90% of our communications from body language. And I teach this to officers when I teach at the academy. As soon as you get out of that police car, as soon as someone sees you, they're judging you. It's natural, it's what we do. Think of the difference of getting out, walking as a police officer with a nightstick in your hand, or if you see someone else We're just getting out of a car. I'll give you the example of the body language, how important it is. When I was a shift commander for our Western District, we were having issues on Friday and Saturday nights in one of the public housing communities. Generally, the people causing the problems were young men who did not live in the community. They're coming in from other communities. So I started having my line up right in the middle of the community. With that, you'd have anywhere from 12 to 15 police cars. We then would walk and do foot patrol, but I don't really like calling it foot patrol. I walked the community with a coffee cup in my hand. So there were people that would say I looked unprofessional, and so be it. But the coffee cup actually, like the size of this cup, is big with a handle on it. As I walked and drank coffee from that, what impression did I give to the community members versus if I walked that community with a nightstick in my hand or even a flashlight in my hand? So I had a flashlight in my back pocket, so if I needed it, it was there. But think about how important that is. Think of our facial expressions and our eye contact. And now that eye contact can be difficult because different cultures have different acceptance of what is acceptable. Think of silence in a conversation. A lot of silence, someone may think that you're not listening to them. So how do you counter that? I learned this from one of our clinicians that used to work at Crisis, Dustin. When you're in a room with him, and I was on one call specifically, I think back to, this lady was talking and the entire time his head's nodding. That's a way to let them know you're listening. It can counteract the silence of them thinking you're not participating. Also, think about our stance. Think about the person, if you're seated, and you'll never see me like this on an intervention. I just purposely, you'll never do it because I'll put my hands in my pocket first. Think about the difference it makes when you're open stance like this, talking to someone. Think about also if you're sitting across from someone or if you're sitting next to them. As well as think about if one person is standing and one person is seated. You want to be at that same level. Perfect world, if I'm doing an intervention, I'm here and I have a person sitting next to me, almost like you're in a sofa or a love seat doing that intervention where you're talking, where it doesn't appear to be confrontational, at the same level, where one's not higher, superior down on someone else, because it has to be equal. So this is something, so I am an ICISF, the International Critical and Stress Foundation instructor. So this is something I took from from individual in crisis class, the empathy cascade. Active reflective listening conveys understanding, which fosters trust, which increases the likelihood of compliance. It's using those communication skills to develop a relationship for us all to be working together. So when should I not intervene? And this is tough. And this is when a lot of times you're going to have to call for a next level to help for law enforcement. So what do we mean by when the person has clear thoughts, low emotion, and non-compliant? It's when someone's behavior is inappropriate, but their behavior is due to a calculated decision. They may not be in mental health distress. They're not having a mental health emergency. They're not showing, they're not emotional, whatever. They're just doing their behavior is due to a deviant mentality, if that makes sense. So when you start looking at also when the person has contaminated thoughts, high emotional, and is non-compliant, they could be in a state of psychosis and unable to understand what's going on. These are really tough situations for police officers to be in, because the person doesn't understand. And this is where we teach to use all the proper tools to try to de-escalate someone. at times we may not be able to, when force may be the only issue. And I'm going to give you an example of this. A few years ago, the parents of a young lady who was in her 20s called in to police and 911. They needed help. Their daughter had a baby who was about a year old, and the daughter had been in a psychotic state for 24 hours. She had been standing in the upstairs bathroom holding the baby, periodically nursing the baby, but hadn't put the baby down in 24 hours. Patrol was there, then they called for us to help. This young lady was in a state of psychosis. Really, we tried to speak with her, we tried to talk with her. Everything we did, we were not successful. We could not build a relationship with her because of the state that she was in. Now, the key is, how do we help her and be helpful, not hurtful? But also remember, she had a baby in her hand that she was holding. So when one of the other officers in my unit got there, what we did was we had to make sure it was a situation. We were really afraid of the baby if the baby was dropped. If we start wrestling with her, what could happen to the baby? If not just dropping the baby, there's the bathroom vanity there. It's a hard surface. There's also the bathtub, just think of all the things that are hard surfaces. They not just hurt her, hurt the baby. What the other officer was able to do was grab her at the same time I grabbed the baby. He was able to hold her, and then we backtrack. We also had the fire department there too. So we had the fire department there with paramedics to help just in case something did go wrong, but they were also there to help provide physical health. So the other officer grabbed her, was holding on to her. I grabbed the baby. Immediately got the baby, and I handed the baby to the baby's grandmother, who was this young lady's mother. The other officer, as he held her, she took her foot, kicked against the wall, kicked him back where he landed into the bathtub that was full of water. Because what she was actually doing the time, whenever she got thirsty, she would hit the shower on, the drain was clogged, and she would put her head under the shower to drink water. So they landed there. The paramedics came in. They were able to give her medication to sedate her, then take her to the hospital where she was committed on an emergency petition and got the help that she needed and that she deserved. We really used the minimal amount of force that was necessary, and no one was injured, neither her or the baby. That was a tough situation, and we were blessed that nothing bad happened. So what about the parts that people as police officers we can help? I gave this scenario earlier about the lady, really high educated, refusing help, that we were able to do an intervention because she did one act of behavior that I could say made her a danger to someone else. But it's these times that we have to be creative to keep the person safe and the community safe. So I think I'm a few minutes ahead, Monique, but is it okay if I take questions now?
Questions.
So was there any questions that came through the chat?
I don't see any questions. Unless they, we have to give them a 20, 30 second delay to get to come over. But that was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
That was awesome. I learned, and I think I wrote down most of your presentation because I was writing notes. So that has really helped me out in a lot of situations, and how to focus on the other person and what they're thinking about, and not just necessarily what's uncomfortable for me. So I appreciate that. I'm sure other people appreciate that information. You were very, your presentation was very clear, And I like how you walked through the steps and everything. That was great. So, but we would like to open up the floor right now for the chat room if anyone would like to ask any questions. So if you have any questions, please post them on the social wall for this session on the right-hand side of your screen. But you have to keep in mind that it's a 20 to 30-second delay for it to go from there to here so that we can see what your questions are. Anyone? All right, here's a question. It says, what authority does the civil response team have?
So we have what's called mobile crisis teams, which are 2 clinicians. One is generally independently licensed. So an independently licensed clinician, just like a police officer, have the ability to complete an emergency petition. So with that, the emergency petition, the difference is, though, the clinician doesn't have the authority to actually physically do that, if that makes sense. It takes the police officer to actually take the person, technically they're in custody, to the hospital. So the clinician can complete it, but the officer then has to sign off on it and physically take the person, if that makes sense. That's the authority that they have in the state of Maryland, is under the emergency petition concept. Our CIT teams are both, that clinician and officer together, both can complete it, but it's the legal authority for the force to serve it is the officer. So another question came, what are your thoughts on shifting calls for mental health crisis to a different team completely via the 988 process? So I am not familiar with the 988 process. We actually in Anne Arundel County have what's called a warm line, where people can call in 24/7. Initially, it started strictly for mental health. Now people can call for anything. And there are some calls that are diverted. The problem is someone's in crisis and they need to be petitioned. It takes the police officer's authority to do that, because of you're taking them in, technically taking them into custody. Even if they're not placed in handcuffs, they're still technically in custody. The other part of that is what if there's a history of violence there? What if there's substance abuse? The person has a history of violence and other circumstances. And it sort of goes into the next is, does the police department provide mental health training to police officers? It's getting the right officers to respond. In 2015, I know we were the first major department in Maryland. I've been told the first major department in the nation. We trained every officer in mental health first aid. I did almost all the trainings myself. I'm a mental health first aid instructor for both youth and adults. 23% of our departments trained in CIT, which is the crisis intervention team training based on the Memphis model of 40 hours hands-on training. So with that, we when we did that initially, we had a 21% reduction in use of force, and it has been down that low since. And I'm proud of that. It shows that where we are today. So it says, you said that your department uses the least restraint possible instead of handcuffs. Is that an internal policy, or does it require a county law institute? Actually, it's in our rules and regs. So actually, I was looking at it yesterday, the exact policy, and it's a policy within the department. And I'll actually read, if I can quickly find it. So In our rule and reg, if an individual with mental health issues is taken into custody, officers will make a reasonable effort to use the least restraint possible and protect the arrestee from self-injury while taking all necessary precautions. The overall circumstances and the person's potential for violence will determine if handcuffs will be used as a temporary measure to prevent injury to the individual or officer. So it's individual policy per the police department. So does the police department offer mental health services to police officers to help them cope with the stressors from the job? Yes. So in addition to being a mental health first aid instructor, I'm an approved instructor for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. All major incidents, those incidents that shock your conscience, we go out, we respond out to assist officers with debriefings. It could be a group debriefing. We follow the procedures and the training of ICISF when we do it. It could be an individual intervention. It's that incident that shocks your conscience. You can't put a definition on it, but you know it when you see it. It could be responding out after an officer is given CPR to a baby that dies from SIDS. It could be responding out. Yesterday, we had 2 completed suicides in the county. One of them was the person they called, notified a relative that they were going to take their life. Officers got there and the person shot themselves before, as the officers got on scene. With that, we were out debriefing those officers, and we went out again this morning to the entire shift. So really, it's case by case basis. Supervisors call in. I get every commander's report, so I review that. Officers call in for each other, and I'm really proud of what we do to help officers, because when you look at it, officers that get in trouble, generally it's because there's some kind of traumatic incident that happened in their career that was never addressed appropriately, and they didn't get the help they need. I'm proud to say that we have officers who have had issues with substance abuse that we have taken them to inpatient treatment, and they're great productive officers. They've gone in treatment and they're in recovery now, and we're able, and we treat them the way that we should treat people. Instead of asking the question, what's wrong with you? We've asked, what have you experienced? What's your lived experience, and how can we help? So next question, what resources are available for my teenager who needs help? In Anne Arundel County, I would encourage you to call into the warm line, which is, for Anne Arundel County, it's 410-768-5522. Other counties have their own warm line. I know Grassroots has a line in Howard County, but Baltimore City, I believe, has theirs through Baltimore City Crisis Response. But call in and have a mobile team come out and talk to you as a family and help. The team, when they come out, can provide those additional help, additional resources to you. So I hope I addressed everyone's questions. And if there's any more questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. So I'll add, what do we do to help officers? We work hand in hand with our FOP auxiliary to help families in their time of need in the police department. So with that, we have someone in the department now. I'm going to be calling the FOP auxiliary president to set up a meal train. Just one of those little things we can do to help officers and their families when they're going through. And it could be medical emergencies. It could be job-related injuries and things like that. But it's those little things that we can do to help that make a big difference. Last year, at the onset of COVID, I was hospitalized in intensive care with COVID. At that point, the department, my captain, organized a meal train for my family. My wife was quarantined. My adult daughter was my wife was quarantined in the house. I had an adult daughter who was sick with COVID. It was before testing was available for COVID. And I had my other daughter and son who were grown in college, who came home from college, that were in the house. it was extremely tough time with my family, but by them providing the meal train, every lunch, every dinner, until I was no longer quarantined, was being delivered to the front door. My wife would get a call, open the door, and lunch or dinner's there. It took a lot. It really helped a lot. And those are the kind of things we do for officers in Anne Arundel County to help when they need help.
That is great. Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So we'll give it a few more seconds to see if anything new comes in. How many officers are trained in what you do? How many officers are trained in what you do?
So for in Anne Arundel County, in my unit, it's myself, a sergeant, and 8 officers. Every officer is trained in the Department of Mental Health First Aid, and then 181 are trained in CIT, which is we follow the Memphis model of the 40-hour hands-on training for mental health. It teaches the officers to have empathy and understanding to help families and people with lived experience. Part of that, the final day is all de-escalation training in which we do practical exercises. Officers who have already completed the training come back and do role play, and they do a great job. A lot of the officers actually, what they do is the role play is they're role playing for calls for service they've been on. One officer in particular actually acts out as if he's one person that he responds to help frequently, and it's a great experience for the officers. And every one of them actually comes afterwards say this is the best training they've had.
Great, that's a great answer. I really like that. I was wondering how many officers need to be trained.
Yeah. And it's so the International Chiefs of Police recommend that for a department, every officer is trained in mental health first aid, and that 20% of your department is trained in CIT. And right now we're about 23%. We have another class coming up in November. And we don't just train our own, we actually do other jurisdictions. So we train Transportation Authority, we've trained Annapolis City, we train Hyattsville, we train the Prince George's Sheriff's Office. We've actually, until they started their own program, we were training the Secret Service at the White House. And now they have their own training that they're attending.
I'm just checking. I appear to have some technical difficulties on my end. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Looks like there's no other questions in the social wall.
All right. Okay, well, we're almost at our time. And is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, ma'am.
Again, great presentation. So for those who are not able to get your questions through, we're almost out of time for that. But what you can do is send your questions and the name of the session you attended to connection@NAMIMD.org. That's connection@NAMIMD.org. All right, so that's all the time we have for now. So thank you all so much for joining us today. With this workshop session closes, you will be prompted to fill out a brief survey. If you would like to receive CEUs for this workshop, you must complete the survey in order to qualify. The next workshop session starts at 3:30. Be sure to check out NamiLand and other amazing virtual resources in our virtual exhibitor hall. Don't forget to participate in our resource scavenger hunt. If you find all of the resources listed and submit your answers by the end of the conference, you'll be entered in a raffle to win a DSW messenger badge. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.